I want to tell you something before I start. I was there. I know how that sounds. Everyone who tells a story like this says they were there. They weren't. Most of them heard it from someone else, or they pieced it together from logs and reports and the kind of official language that bureaucracies use when they're trying to make something terrifying sound manageable. I was actually there. I was standing close enough to feel the air shift. I was close enough to hear the sound it made, the sound he made, when they finally pushed him too far. And I want you to understand something before I even begin to describe what happened, because if I don't tell you this first, you're going to think I'm exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. What I saw that day changed every assumption I had ever carried about life in this galaxy, about power, about what it means to be dangerous, about what the word apex actually means when you strip away all the comfortable mythology we wrap around it. My name is Voss Narakel. I'm a third-tier observational analyst aboard the galactic containment vessel Sovereign Reach, registry number GCV Reach 7741. I have spent 11 standard years doing exactly what my title suggests, observing. I watch things. I record them. I write reports that get filed into databases that senior officers skim once and then forget. That's my job. But I am telling you right now, sitting here, with my hands still not entirely steady, that what happened aboard this vessel 3 standard weeks ago is not something any database can contain. So let me start from the beginning. The Sovereign Reach is not a military ship, exactly. I mean, it has weapons, enough to level a moon, technically, but that's not what it was built for. The Sovereign Reach is what the Galactic Containment Authority calls a high-security biological specimen transport vessel, which is a long, uncomfortable phrase that essentially means this. We find dangerous things in the universe, we cage them, and we move them somewhere that the rest of the universe doesn't have to worry about them. We have carried Kethra predators. We have transported an adolescent void Leviathan, which required us to reinforce roughly 40% of the ship's internal structure just to manage the vibration field it generates when it breathes. We once moved a creature called a shriek node, which has no body in any conventional sense, but exists as a perpetual oscillating field of psychic pressure that drove the night shift crew to collective hallucinations for 6 days before the containment team figured out how to dampen it. We do this work because someone has to. The galaxy is full of things that are dangerous, and the civilizations of the Galactic Accord have agreed, through approximately 900 years of painful negotiation, that the best approach to dangerous things is not extermination, it is study. Containment. Understanding. That is the official position. Unofficially, some of the creatures we transport are studied, and some of them just sit in containment forever because no one has the courage to get close enough to study them, and the reports just say ongoing assessment, until someone retires and someone else inherits the problem. I've been on this ship long enough to know which category most of our cargo falls into. 3 standard weeks ago, we were docked at Relay Station Keshar, which sits at the outer edge of the Varan Corridor, one of the quieter transit routes in this arm of the galaxy. Keshar is not a glamorous posting. It is a fuel station with pretensions. Gray walls, recycled air, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look slightly unwell. I was in the secondary observation bay, finishing a review of documentation from our previous transport. A pair of hollow-spine serpents from the Delathian marshes, both now delivered to the Accord Research Collective without incident, when Commander Yeva Sarek came in. Sarek is not the kind of person who announces herself dramatically. She moves quietly for someone of her rank, and she has a habit of standing in doorways for a moment before she speaks, like she's deciding whether the conversation is worth having. She stood there for what felt like a long time. Then she said, "We have a new assignment." "Already?" I set down my documentation tablet. "We just delivered the Serpents 4 days ago. The crew hasn't even had full leave rotation." "I know." She stepped into the room and let the door close behind her. "This one isn't coming from the standard assignment queue." That got my attention. The standard assignment queue is where everything comes from. It's a bureaucratic beast that prioritizes transport requests by threat tier, urgency rating, and available vessel capacity. Getting bumped out of the queue means someone very senior made a direct call to someone very senior on our end, and the normal process got skipped. That never means anything good. "What are we transporting?" I asked. Sarek was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "A human." I blinked. "A human?" "Yes. We're a Tier 7 containment vessel," I said. "We carry Apex-class biological threats. We have 16 redundant containment systems and a biometric lock architecture that was specifically designed to hold a void Leviathan." "I'm aware. We are being asked to transport a human." "Yes." "Sarek," I leaned back. "Humans are a Tier 3 designation at most. They're fragile. They have a lifespan of about 90 standard years if they don't get into trouble, and they almost always get into trouble. They're clever, yes, but they're not Tier 7. No one considers them Tier 7. Sarek looked at me for a long moment. Not the way she usually looks at me, which is with the mild patience of someone who has heard all the questions before and is waiting for the questions to stop. She looked at me differently. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to say the next part. "This one is," she said. His name was on the transfer documentation as Unit Designation H7, which told me immediately that whoever had filed the paperwork did not want to use his real name. That was unusual. We identify biological specimens by species classification and a designation number, yes, but humans are a sapient species. You don't call a sapient being a unit. Not in official documentation. Someone was scared of something. I pulled everything I could find from the pre-transfer briefing files, which were sparse in a way that felt intentional, like someone had gone through and removed things, rather than the files simply being incomplete. What I got was this. The subject was male, adult, approximate age within normal human parameters. He had been recovered from a location the files listed as restricted operational security. He had been held at an interim facility for, and this was the number that made me stop and read it again, 3 standard years. In an interim facility. The Galactic Containment Authority doesn't hold things at interim facilities for 3 years. Interim facilities are exactly what the name implies, temporary. You hold something there while you figure out where it actually goes. 3 years of figuring it out meant one of two things. Either the bureaucracy had lost the paperwork, which happens, or they genuinely could not decide what to do with him. The latter, I was beginning to suspect, was the case. The briefing files had one section that had not been redacted, and it was a behavioral summary from the interim facility's lead psychologist. I read it 4 times. Each time I understood it a little better and felt a little less certain about this assignment. It said, "Subject demonstrates consistent high-functioning cognition under sustained stress conditions. Adaptation rate to novel containment protocols exceeds anything in our behavioral database for sapient species. Subject has, over the course of the assessment period, effectively learned the operational patterns of this facility to a degree that would, in theory, allow for autonomous facility management. This has been deemed a containment concern. Additionally, subject has repeatedly communicated, in multiple Accord languages including 3 that are not listed in any human linguistic database, that he understands the containment measures and finds them adequate but unnecessary. Subject expresses no hostility. This has been deemed a containment concern." I read that last line several times. He expressed no hostility. This has been deemed a containment concern. Because they understood, whoever wrote that hostility is something you can work with. Hostility tells you what the creature wants: escape, territory, freedom, blood, whatever it is. Hostility is legible. You can design a containment system around hostility because you know what it's trying to do. A creature that shows no hostility, that quietly learns everything about its environment, that tells you calmly that the cage is unnecessary. That's something else entirely. That's something that isn't trying to escape. That's something that's simply waiting. The transfer happened at 3:40 station time, which meant the loading bay was as empty as it ever gets. Sarek had requested a minimal crew presence for the physical transfer, just her, 2 senior containment officers, and me, because someone decided that an observational analyst should be recording everything. Lucky me. The Keshar Station security team brought him in on a transit platform, the kind with magnetic restraint fields built into the floor that essentially freeze you in place if you step onto them. 4 of their heaviest security personnel flanked the platform. Another 6 stood in a perimeter around it, weapons not drawn but not holstered either. That's 10 armed officers for 1 human. I noticed that. He was, and I want to be precise here because I know what you're imagining and I don't want you to build a picture that's wrong. He was unremarkable. In appearance, he was tall for a human, I knew that from the files, but not monumentally so, broad across the shoulders. He had dark hair that had grown somewhat long during his time in custody and a face that was not threatening, not scarred or brutal, just a face. The kind of face you might pass in a corridor on any station in the Accord and not remember 5 minutes later. Except for his eyes. I don't know how to describe his eyes in a way that captures what I noticed about them. They were just eyes, human eyes, but they were still in a way that was difficult to look at directly, not still like something sleeping, still like something watching, like whatever was happening behind them was operating at a speed that the front of his face had simply decided not to advertise. He stepped off the transit platform without being prompted, which made 3 of the security officers reach for their weapons before they stopped themselves. He looked at them, just looked quietly with that stillness, and then he looked at Sorek. "Commander," he said, his voice was even, not flat, not emotional, even, like someone who has decided at some foundational level that tone is a choice. Sorek said, "You've reviewed the transfer documentation." "I have," he said. "The Sovereign Reach, Tier 7 containment, that's a significant upgrade from what they had me in at Keshar." "Is that a concern?" Sorek asked. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. Sorek nodded and gestured for the containment officers to begin the boarding protocol. He went with them without argument, without resistance, without any of the behavioral indicators that the briefing files had apparently led Sorek to prepare for. He just walked. I fell into step at the back of the group, tablet in hand, and I watched him as we moved through the loading corridor toward the ship. He was looking at everything, not frantically, not obviously, but constantly. His eyes moved across surfaces, across structural joints, across the placement of security panels. The way a person looks at a room they've just walked into and know they might need to navigate in the dark later. The way someone looks at something they are learning. I wrote that in my notes at the time. Subject appears to be conducting passive environmental assessment during intake transit. What I didn't write, because I didn't have words for it yet, was the feeling that came with watching him. The feeling that we had just let something onto this ship that was going to be very, very difficult to put back. The containment suite we had prepared for him was on level 5, which is the ship's most secured residential level. I say residential because the Accord's sapient containment protocols require a certain standard of living, basic comfort furnishings, temperature regulation, atmospheric controls calibrated to species requirements, access to materials for cognitive engagement. We're not running a dungeon here. We're running a containment facility that happens to also be a ship. The suite had been fitted with layers that the average Tier 7 containment doesn't include for sapient species, because sapient species usually don't require them. There was a standard electromagnetic barrier at the door. There was a secondary pressure field that would activate if the primary was breached. There was a behavioral monitoring system with 17 distinct sensor types running a continuous profile. There was a communications node that allowed for one-way audio only. We could speak to him, he could speak to us, but he could not send any signal outside the suite. And there was a manual override panel on the outside of the door that could seal the entire suite in a vacuum in under 4 seconds, because someone at the authority had insisted on it, and I was beginning to understand why. He walked into the suite. He looked around it. He looked at the furnishings, the walls, the sensor cluster mounted in the ceiling corner. He looked at that one a second longer than the others, and then he sat down on the sleeping platform and looked at Sorek, who was standing in the doorway. "You've put a lot of work into this," he said. "We take containment seriously," Sorek said. "I can tell," he paused. "The pressure field secondary is a nice touch. I don't think they had that at the last place." Sorek said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is there anything you need for the transit period?" He thought about it, genuinely seemed to think about it, which was interesting, as if he was running through some internal list of calculations. "Reading material," he said. "Something in standard. I've been working through Keshar's library, but they had a limited selection." Sorek said she'd arrange it. Then she stepped back, and the door sealed, and the electromagnetic barrier went live with a soft blue pulse. The containment team around her visibly relaxed. I did not relax. I was looking at the monitoring feeds, already pulling up on my tablet, and I noticed something. In the suite, he had immediately gone back to looking at everything again. Slowly, calmly, the walls, the ventilation grills, the wiring housing that ran along the ceiling. Like someone reading a map. I wrote that in my notes. Then I went to find out everything I could about who this person actually was. His name, which I found buried in a file that wasn't quite redacted enough, was Carrick Malin. He had been a soldier. That was the first and most important thing. Human military, specifically, from a unit designation that didn't match any of the standard Accord-registered human military organizations, which meant he'd come from one of the independent human factions that operate outside formal Accord membership. The ones the Accord knows about but doesn't officially discuss. He had been stationed, and again this was imprecise, in a region of contested space near the Varan corridor's inner edge, roughly 40 light-years from where we were now. There had been an engagement. The word engagement was doing significant heavy lifting in that sentence, because what the partially redacted files described, in fragments and data ghosts left behind by whoever had tried to clean them up, sounded like something else. It sounded like a massacre. Of the other side, I found a deposition from a medical officer at an Accord observation post who had been present at the aftermath. She described arriving at a site where there had been, according to pre-engagement intelligence, a squad-level Galactic Accord enforcement team of 24 personnel, equipped with standard combat gear, in position to intercept what they had classified as a Tier 2 threat. The threat had been one human. The deposition said that when the observation team arrived, the enforcement squad was alive. That was noted very specifically, as if the fact of their survival was itself remarkable. But that their equipment was not functional, their position was not tenable, and there was not a single member of the squad who had not, as the deposition phrased it, been made comprehensively aware that they were outmatched. The human, Carrick Malin, had been sitting in the middle of the position when the observation team arrived. He had not run. He had not hidden. He had sat there, apparently calm, apparently unhurt, and when the observation team's commander had trained a weapon on him, he had said, and this was in the deposition, verbatim, "I was wondering when the grown-ups would show up." After that, the files got complicated. Jurisdictional disputes between the Accord Enforcement Division and two independent human factions. 47 days of what the documentation called negotiation, but which read more like everyone arguing about who was responsible for him. Eventually, the Accord had taken custody, on the grounds that the engagement had occurred in Accord-monitored space, and he had been transferred to the interim facility at Keshar, and the 3 years of ongoing assessment had begun. And now he was on my ship. I sat with all of this for a while. I looked at my notes. I looked at the monitoring feeds. He had asked for reading material. Sarek had sent him a selection of texts in standard history, some technical materials, a couple of fiction collections that were popular on the long transit routes. He had gone through the first 4 texts in 6 hours. Not skimmed. Read. I could see his engagement pattern on the biometric monitors, sustained cognitive activity, the kind that indicates genuine processing rather than passive consumption. He was reading them. All of them. Like someone getting smarter on purpose. We were 2 days out of Keshar when things started to change. Nothing dramatic at first, small things. The kind of things that, individually, you could explain away as coincidence or equipment drift, or just the normal strangeness of a long transit. It started with the ship's environmental systems. The Sovereign Reach maintains a complex atmospheric regulation network across all its levels, calibrated specifically to the needs of whatever we're transporting. Different containment suites have different atmospheres. Level 5 runs standard Accord habitation mix, the universal standard that's been agreed upon because it works for most Accord species at a comfort level, even if it's not perfect for anyone. 2 days out of Keshar, the system that monitors atmospheric pressure differentials between level 5 and the rest of the ship started producing irregular readings. The engineering team looked at it. They said it was a calibration artifact. The sensors needed recalibration, which was routine on older vessels, and the Sovereign Reach was not exactly young. They recalibrated the sensors. The irregular readings continued. They recalibrated again. They ran diagnostics. The diagnostics said everything was fine. The reading said everything was not fine, or at least not quite what it should be, in a way that was subtle enough that if you weren't looking for it, you'd call it background noise. I was looking for it. I pulled up the monitoring feeds for the containment suite, and I checked the timestamp on the irregular readings against the behavioral record. The readings had started approximately 4 hours after Carrick Malin had finished his sixth text, a technical document about the Sovereign Reach specifically. It was a public record operational overview that Sarek had included in the library selection because there was no reason not to. Nothing classified in it. Basic specifications, transit capabilities, general system architecture. But now, reading the irregular atmospheric pressure data, I started to think about what you could do with basic system architecture knowledge and a very good understanding of how pressure differentials work in an enclosed vessel. You could probe the system very gently, without ever touching anything, without ever leaving your suite. If you understood the physics well enough, and you controlled your own breathing patterns precisely enough, and you knew exactly where the sensors were, and he had looked at the sensor cluster in his suite for a very long time on the first day, you could create micro-variations in the local air pressure that would propagate through the ventilation network and show up as anomalies in the monitoring system. You could, in other words, ping the ship. Like echolocation. Like someone in the dark, figuring out the shape of their cage by feeling where the walls are. I sat very still for about 30 seconds after I worked that out. Then I went to Sorek. She listened to me. She was good at that, at not interrupting while something was being explained to her, which is rarer than it should be in a command structure. When I was done, she said, "You're certain?" "No," I said. "I'm not certain of anything. I'm saying it's possible and the timing is consistent, and I think we should treat it as a working hypothesis." "Malin is in a sealed containment suite on level 5, she said. "He has no access to ship systems. He cannot actually affect anything." "He's not affecting anything," I said. "He's mapping." She was quiet for a moment. "Keep monitoring," she said. "I am," I said. "Sarek, one other thing." She waited. "He asked about the ship. He asked me, through the comm yesterday afternoon, about our transit route." Her expression shifted slightly. "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't authorized to share routing information with a containment subject." "And?" "He said, fair enough, and asked if I could send him something on Varan corridor stellar cartography instead. For general interest, he said." She was very still for a moment. "What did you say?" "I said I'd check with you." I paused. "I didn't send it." Sarek nodded slowly. "Good." We looked at each other. "Sarek," I said, "what did he do? I've read the files, the parts that weren't redacted. I know about the engagement at the Accord enforcement position, but I feel like I'm missing something they didn't write down." She was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Before the engagement at the enforcement position, there was a facility, on a station in contested space. There was an incident there, and the incident is why the Accord enforcement team was there in the first place." She stopped. "The station had been in the control of a Kethra syndicate. You know what a Kethra syndicate is?" I knew. The Kethra are apex predators by any conventional measure, six-limbed, highly intelligent, with a social hierarchy built entirely around dominance violence. A Kethra syndicate is an organized criminal structure, the kind that trafficking networks and weapons brokers use because the Kethra don't negotiate and they don't leave witnesses. "The station was a processing facility," Sorek said, "for captives, various species. They had been operating it for approximately 9 years. The Accord knew it existed. The Accord had been, and I'm using the official language here, developing a response strategy." I already didn't like where this was going. "Malin went in alone," Sorek said. "We don't know how he found the station. We don't know how he got in. The station had a crew of approximately 40 Kethra operatives." She paused. "When the Accord enforcement team arrived at the station 18 hours later, following an anonymous navigation beacon that pinged all Accord emergency frequencies simultaneously, they found the station fully operational, all systems functional, all captives, 114 individuals of 8 different species, present, unharmed, and in a secured location of the station that had been, apparently, set up for their safety." I waited. "The 40 Kethra operatives," Sorek said, "were in the station's cargo bay in structural restraints, all 40. She let that sit in the air between us. He put 40 Kethra in restraints, I said. All 40, she said, alive, intact, every single one of them. She looked at me. The enforcement team's medical officer noted that each of the Kethra demonstrated extreme signs of what she described as pre-state psychological response. She said she had never seen a Kethra in pre-state before. She didn't think it was physiologically possible for the species. I didn't say anything for a while. And then, I said eventually, he sat in the middle of the enforcement position and waited for them. He waited for them, Sorek said. And when they arrived, armed and in full combat configuration, he told them the grown-ups had arrived. The silence between us felt different now, heavier. He wasn't being sarcastic, I said. Was he when he said that? Sorek looked at me. What do you mean? He wasn't mocking them, I said slowly. He was relieved. The grown-ups had arrived, the people with the authority to figure out what to do with him, the people who could take over. I thought about it. He didn't want to be in charge of this anymore. Sorek was very still. He'd been alone in that station, I said, doing something extraordinary, something terrible probably, to put 40 Kethra in cargo restraints. And when it was done, he sat down and he waited for someone to come because the job was done and he wanted someone to hand it to. I looked at the monitoring feed, at the still figure on level 5, who was reading again, calmly and quickly, with his eyes that were always watching even when everything else was at rest. And we've had him in a cage for 3 years, I said. The incident began on the 8th day of transit. Not because of anything Malin did. I want to be very clear about that. What happened on the 8th day was not his doing, was not his plan, was not in any way his fault, and I think that's the part that haunts me most, if I'm honest. We had been running through a quieter segment of the Varen corridor, which has a reputation for being low traffic and therefore low risk, when we hit something that wasn't on any of our charts. The Sovereign Reach has a full sensor array, long-range, short-range, gravitational, electromagnetic, the works. We don't fly blind. We have crew monitoring those systems around the clock. What appeared on the 8th day was not detectable by our sensor array, because it had been specifically designed to circumvent sensor arrays of our type. That was a technical detail we understood only after the fact. What appeared without warning from a position that should have been open space was 3 vessels. Not Accord vessels. I was in the observation bay when the proximity alarm went off. I heard it, that particular tone that everyone on a ship hates, the ascending chord that means something has changed outside the hull and the change is not a good one. And I was on my feet and moving before I consciously decided to move. The main observation screen showed me the 3 vessels in the same moment the ship's combat alert went live. They were Deskari configuration. I knew the profile. Everyone in this arm of the galaxy knows the profile. Long, angular, built for speed and for the delivery of precise, devastating weapons fire at close range. The Deskari are mercenaries, not species-level mercenaries the way the Kethra are. The Deskari are an organized military contractor operation, some of the best in the galaxy by reputation, and their reputation is not built on mercy. 3 Deskari Hunter-class vessels, in formation, cutting across our path. I heard Sarek's voice over the command channel. All hands combat alert. This is not a drill. Seal all decks, seal all containment suites, power to shields. Then a second voice, the comms officer, said, Commander, incoming signal from the lead vessel. They're using an Accord legal frequency. Which meant they were going to make demands, not just shoot us. They wanted something. They wanted him. The signal was, as these things go, almost polite. The Deskari commander, who identified herself as Strike Captain Vare, in the flat, efficient tone of someone who is used to people doing what she says, explained the situation concisely. They were operating on a recovery contract. The subject designated H7 in our containment was the target of the contract. The contractor had legal standing under a jurisdictional provision that I won't pretend to fully understand, but which the Deskari clearly believed gave them the right to demand our compliance. Strike Captain Vare gave us 20 minutes to transfer the subject. She said this without inflection, the way you say things when you are very confident in what will happen if your request is declined. Then she ended the signal, and the 3 Hunter-class vessels held position in a triangle around us. Sarek was in the command center when I arrived, standing very straight and looking at the tactical display with the expression she uses when she is thinking faster than the situation wants her to. "Options," she said to the room. The tactical officer laid them out. "We could attempt to run. The Sovereign Reach is not a fast ship, and 3 Deskari Hunter-class vessels in formation could overtake us before we could reach any kind of Accord support range. We could attempt to fight, we had weapons, but a Tier 7 containment vessel is not a warship, and the Deskari knew that. We could comply, and I noticed that option was on the list, delivered without emphasis by the tactical officer, which told me something about what everyone in the room was quietly thinking. Or we could try to reach Accord emergency frequencies and wait for support that might not arrive in time. 20 minutes is not a lot of time. Sarek stood there for 4 of those minutes, just thinking, looking at the display. Then she said, "Get me a comm line to the containment suite." He had been monitoring the situation. That's not a guess. When Sarek opened the comm channel, he spoke before she did. He said, 3 vessels. Deskari configuration by the sound of the proximity alarm pattern. They want me. Not a question. Yes, Sarek said. A brief pause. How long do you have? 16 minutes now. Another pause, a longer one. Who holds the contract? He asked. We don't know. Is there any chance of Accord support in the window? Sarek looked at the tactical officer, who shook his head slightly. No, she said. Silence from the containment suite. Then I'd like to make a suggestion. Sarek stood very still. I'm listening. Open the suite, he said. The room became very, very quiet. I could hear the background hum of the ship's systems, the atmospheric processors, the power conduits, the low vibration of the engines holding us in position. That's not something I can authorize unilaterally, Sarek said. I know, Malin said. That's why I'm asking. Give me one reason, Sarek said. One good reason why releasing you from containment is the right decision in this situation. The pause this time was shorter. Because those 3 ships are here for me, he said. And if you hand me over, they'll still destroy yours, because Deskari contractors don't leave witnesses to a non-compliant intercept, and you were non-compliant for 16 minutes before you agreed. They'll log it as a combat loss. Another pause. And because I am very good at this, Commander, this particular problem. I have been doing this kind of work for a long time, and if you let me out, I can end this without losing your ship or your crew. The room was silent. And if we don't, Sarek said, then you have 14.5 minutes to make a different decision, he said, and his voice, still even, still measured, carried something underneath it that I hadn't heard in it before. Not a threat, not desperation. Absolute certainty. Sarek authorized it. I want to be honest about this. I would have made the same call, not because the logic was airtight, it wasn't, not entirely, but because of that voice, because of what was underneath it. Because when someone speaks to you with that particular quality of certainty, the part of you that has been alive long enough in the galaxy to recognize real things from performed things knows the difference. This was real. The electromagnetic barrier powered down, the secondary pressure field released, the suite door opened. He walked out of it in the same way he'd walked into everything, unhurried, steady with those eyes already moving. He was in the plain gray clothing the transit protocols required for containment subjects. No equipment, nothing in his hands. He looked at Sarek. Your weapons locker is on level 3, I'll need access. What will you do with it? She asked. Negotiate, he said. Something about the way he said that word made 2 of the security officers in the corridor take a small, involuntary step backward. He didn't look at them. He was already looking past them, toward the corridor that led to the ship's exterior access points. I'll also need comms access, he said. Full spectrum, not the containment channel. To do what? Sarek said. To talk to the Deskari, he said. Before I do anything else, always talk first. Sarek stared at him for a moment, then she said, follow me. He stood at the comms terminal on the bridge. I was there. I had followed the group up from level 5 and stationed myself in the corner with my tablet, which is what I always do when I don't know what else to do, I record things. He looked at the communications array. He reached out and adjusted two settings that I would not have known how to find, and the signal quality on the Accord frequency improved immediately. The comms officer made a small sound of surprise. Malin said, "Open the channel." Sorek authorized it. The comm channel opened. Strike Captain Vare's voice came through. "Commander Sorek, you have 8 minutes remaining." Malin leaned toward the comms pickup and said, "Strike Captain." Silence on the channel. "Then that's not Commander Sorek." "No," Malin said, "it's not." Another silence, longer. "H7, Strike Captain," Vare said, and her voice had changed, not much, a very small change, but it was there. "My name is Carrick Malin," he said. "I want to talk to you about your contract." "There's nothing to discuss," Vare said. "Surrender to the escort team, or we will take the ship." "I know," Malin said. "Here's what I want you to know, Strike Captain. I've had 8 days to study this vessel. I know its systems. I know the atmospheric network, the power conduit layout, the shield generator positions, the weapons array mounting points, and the automated emergency protocols. I know every structural weak point between level 2 and level 7. He paused. "I also know Deskari Hunter-class tactical architecture. The variant you're running is the Generation 4 configuration. I know the shield harmonics for that generation. I know the power cycling interval on the primary weapons array. I know the emergency separation distance required between units for the formation to maintain coherence. Not a breath on the open channel." "I'm telling you this," Malin said, "because I want to negotiate, and I want you to understand that I'm negotiating from an informed position. I'm not asking you to back down because I'm begging. I'm asking you to reconsider because I'm telling you the math doesn't work out in your favor." "You're one human," Vare said, "in a containment vessel." "Yes," he said, "that's accurate." Silence. "I'm also the reason you were hired," he said. "Whoever holds your contract, they told you something about me. Otherwise, this wouldn't be worth the cost of 3 Hunter-class vessels in motion. They told you enough to justify the price. So you know that I'm not just one human in a containment vessel." Another pause. "Don't make me demonstrate it." The silence stretched. I realized I was holding my breath. Around me, every person on the bridge was doing the same thing. "Voiding a contract violates our operating principles," Vare said at last. "I know," Malin said. "I'm not asking you to void it. I'm asking you to defer it. Notify your contractor that the intercept failed due to unforeseen circumstances. It happens. Deskari contracts have performance escape clauses for exactly this kind of situation." "And what are the unforeseen circumstances?" Vare said. "The subject was more trouble than projected," Malin said, simply, without any particular emphasis, like it was just a fact of the situation. The channel was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then Strike Captain Vare said, "We'll need compensation for operational costs. The Sovereign Reach has a cargo inventory I suspect includes materials of sufficient value," Malin said, glancing at Sorek. "Commander." Sorek's jaw was tight, but she nodded. Malin turned back to the comm. "I'll leave the specifics to Commander Sorek and your logistics officer," he said. "One more thing, Strike Captain." "Yes." "Tell your contractor that the contract is burned," he said. "Not deferred, burned. Anyone who comes after me with a contract in hand gets the same answer. I don't hide from it and I don't run. They just need to know that." A very long pause. "Understood," Vare said. The channel closed. The 3 Deskari vessels withdrew 40 minutes later, after a cargo negotiation that cost the Sovereign Reach roughly a third of its supplementary materials inventory. Sorek looked pained about it, but said nothing that wasn't necessary. Malin stood at the observation port for a long moment as the Hunter-class ships pivoted and moved off. He watched them go with that same quality of stillness. Then he turned around and looked at the room. Everyone on the bridge was looking at him, the way people look at something they're trying to understand and not quite managing. He said, "I'll go back to the suite." Sorek said, "The electromagnetic barrier." "Put it back up," he said. "I don't mind, you have a job to do." He meant it. I could hear that he meant it, the way I'd heard the certainty in his voice when he asked to be let out. This was the other side of the same thing. The same person who could do what he'd just done was also genuinely content to go back into the cage. Because the job was done. and he was willing to wait for the next one. I followed him to the corridor, and I said, I don't know why I said it came out before I thought about it. Why did you tell her the contract was burned? That's going to make someone very unhappy. He stopped, he looked at me with those still eyes. Because it's true, he said. Whoever sent her needs to know that hiring people to collect me is a waste of resources. The most efficient outcome is when both sides understand the situation accurately. And what is the situation? I asked, accurately. He looked at me for a long moment. I was a tool, he said, for a long time, a very specific kind of tool for very specific work. I did the work because the work needed doing, but tools don't belong in cages, analyst. He used my job title rather than my name, a precision I found strangely respectful. They belong in hands, and the question isn't whether I'm dangerous. The question is whether the people holding the contract for my capture are more of a problem than I am. He started walking again toward level 5. Over his shoulder, he said, they are. Interlude, what the records say. I want to step outside the story for a moment, outside the timeline, outside the corridor of that ship, because there's something I need to say directly. In the aftermath of the Sovereign Reach incident, I filed my observational report. All 11,000 words of it. The kind of detail and precision that an event like that demands from me, at least. Because that is my job, that is what I'm here for, to see things accurately and record them accurately and give the people who make decisions something real to work from. The report was accepted by the Galactic Containment Authority. It was reviewed. It was, I was told, distributed to senior decision-makers. And then a conversation happened. A series of conversations, actually, at levels of the authority above mine. And I was not party to them. But the result of those conversations landed on my desk 12 days later in the form of a revised containment classification. Carrick Malin, formerly designated Unit H7, Tier 7 containment, had been reclassified. Not downgraded, not released, not transferred to a research facility or a diplomatic holding situation or any of the other options that had apparently been discussed. Reclassified as Tier 9. There are 6 Tier 9 designations in the entire history of the Galactic Containment Authority. 3 of them are physical phenomena, a singularity that was briefly mobile, a stellar nursery that produces periodic radiation bursts at civilization-ending intensity, and an anomaly in the deep Varan that no one has been willing to investigate closely enough to categorize. The other 3 are creatures. 2 of them are extinct. One of them is in a containment facility on a moon in the Outer Accord territories that has not been opened since it was sealed. And now there was a 4th Tier 9 designation on a living thing. A human. One human. Who had asked for reading materials, who had said the containment was adequate but unnecessary, who had put 40 Kethra in cargo restraints and then sat down and waited for the grown-ups to arrive, who had talked 3 Deskari Hunter-class vessels out of a contracted intercept using nothing but a clear voice and an accurate assessment of the situation. Tier 9. I read that classification. I thought about the man who had walked back into a sealed containment suite voluntarily, without complaint, and who had told me that tools don't belong in cages. And I thought about what it means that the most dangerous thing we have ever classified as living, the most dangerous creature in the known universe, as of 12 days after the incident on the Sovereign Reach, is the one thing in that suite that sat there quietly reading. Not threatening, not raging, not trying to break out. Just waiting, understanding everything, patiently, the kind of dangerous that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that is so far beyond the problem you're trying to solve that it has already thought of your solution, and 7 subsequent problems you haven't encountered yet. We made a classification, we gave it a number, we put more locks on the door. And from behind the door, through the one-way audio comm, a quiet voice asked if there were any more texts available on stellar cartography. For general interest, he said. Part 2, The Weight of Understanding. The reclassification changed things on the ship. I want to be precise about how. It didn't change what people did exactly. The shift still ran, the ship still moved. The monitoring systems still ran their continuous profile on the Level 5 suite. But it changed the texture of everything. The way people held themselves in corridors. The way conversations went quiet when someone mentioned the subject. The way the night shift crew would check the monitoring feed a little more often than their protocols required. We had been told, implicitly, by the authority we served, that what we were carrying was the most dangerous living thing ever formally classified. That knowledge lives in you differently than any fact you learn in briefings. Sarek handled it the way she handled everything, with a kind of contained professionalism that I suspect costs her more than she shows. She ran the ship. She made the decisions. She was available for questions, and she answered them clearly and without embellishment, which is what good commanders do. But I noticed that she started checking the monitoring feeds herself, directly, rather than having them routed through the duty officer. And I noticed that she did this at irregular intervals, which is the correct approach. A regular interval becomes a predictable interval, and a predictable interval is something that a sufficiently intelligent subject can account for. Sarek was thinking about this, about him, about what it meant to be the commander of a vessel that was transporting something the authority had classified beyond anything previously living. I was thinking about it too. I went to the suite on the 9th day after the Deskari withdrawal, and I sat down outside the door, just in the corridor on the floor, which is undignified, but nobody was around to see it, and I opened the comm channel. "Analyst," his voice said before I'd spoken. He'd heard me sit down or heard the comm open or simply expected me. "How did you know it was me?" I asked. "You sit differently than the security rotation," he said. "Your breathing pattern is distinct. Also, you're the only person on this ship who's curious enough to just sit outside the door." I thought about that. Is that a compliment? "It's an observation," he said, and then almost immediately, "Yes, it's a compliment." I leaned my head back against the wall. "You've been reclassified," I said. "I thought you should know." A pause. "What tier?" "Ninth." Silence from the suite. "Ah," he said. "Just that, ah." "Does that bother you?" I asked. "The number?" he considered. "No, numbers are just agreements about where something sits on a scale. They don't change what the thing actually is." "What are you actually?" I said. And I meant it as a genuine question, not a provocative one, and I think he heard it that way. A long pause this time. "I'm a person," he said, "who got very good at something that most people don't practice, and then got better, and then better than that, and at some point the gap between what I could do and what other people expected a person to be able to do became," he seemed to search for the word, "legible. To the wrong audiences." "What made you so good at it?" I asked. "The work," he said simply. "I was given a problem and I solved it, then another, and every problem teaches you something about the next one if you're paying attention, if you're really paying attention." "And you paid attention." "I don't know how not to," he said. We were quiet for a moment. The ship hummed around us. "The Kethra station," I said. 114 captives, you went in alone." "Yes." "Why alone?" "Because no one else was going in," he said, and the simplicity of that answer, the complete absence of heroism or drama in it, was somehow more striking than any embellishment could have been. There was a facility. People were in it who shouldn't be. No one was moving to help them, so I went. "Weren't you afraid?" The pause was thoughtful. "Of dying? Yes, I've been afraid of dying for as long as I can remember. It's a useful fear. It makes you careful." Another pause. "Of the Kethra? No." "Why not?" "Because I understood them," he said. "I understood what they were doing and why, and I understood what they were capable of, and I understood what they'd do if they saw me as a threat versus what they'd do if I managed their perception correctly. 40 Kethra is not a number. It's 40 individual decision points, 40 individual models of reality that can each be affected if you understand them." "You managed 40 Kethra individually," I said, "in real time." "The first 6 were the difficult ones," he said. "After that, the others started making different decisions based on what they'd seen happen to the first 6. Behavior propagates in group hierarchies. You only have to change the top of the structure and the rest follows." He paused. "It took a long time, long enough that I was glad when the enforcement team arrived." "Glad?" He'd used the word glad. "You were glad when they came to arrest you," I said. "Glad that someone official was there to handle the aftermath," he said. "The captives needed processing, medical assessment, transport coordination. I don't do administration well. I do the immediate problem well. What comes after is someone else's job." I thought about that for a while. What's your job then? In your own mind, what do you actually do? He was very quiet. Then I solved the problems no one else can. On the 11th day, something happened that I did not put in my official report. I should have, but when I sat down to write it, I found I couldn't find the language that would represent it accurately, and I was not willing to misrepresent it. So it stayed in my personal notes, and now it's here. It was the middle of the night shift. I was in the secondary observation bay, my default location when I can't sleep, which had been most of the night since the Descari incident. The ship was quiet in the way that ships get quiet at night, which isn't actually quiet but is a different texture of sound, fewer voices, different ventilation rhythms, the long, gentle tone of the navigation system processing. The monitoring alert on my tablet was live, as always, the level 5 feed. And at 2:17, Carrick Malin stopped reading. He had been reading for 6 hours. He set down the text. He'd been given physical materials at some point, the portable reader device that the transit protocols allow, and he sat very still. And then he looked up, directly at the sensor cluster in the ceiling corner. Not the way someone looks at a camera because they know it's there. The way someone looks at something because they want to be seen. He looked at it for a long time, not threatening, not performing, just looking, making eye contact with whoever was watching. I was watching. I looked back at him through the feed in the silent middle of the ship's night, and I had the distinct and unambiguous sensation that he knew I was there specifically. Not just someone watching me. Voss Narikel, the one who had sat outside his door and asked real questions. He looked at the sensor for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once, a small, quiet, deliberate nod. Like an acknowledgement. Like someone saying, I see you seeing me, that's all right. Then he picked up the reader and went back to his text. I sat in the secondary observation bay with my tablet and my cold cup of processed coffee, and I did not write anything for a while. I just sat with the strangeness of it. The strangeness of being acknowledged by something, someone, who was classified beyond any scale we had previously applied to a living being. The strangeness of being seen by the most dangerous creature in the universe. And finding that it felt like being seen by a person. We arrived at the designated transfer point on the 14th day. The transfer point was a mid-space installation, not a station exactly, more of a purpose-built receiving platform that exists for exactly this kind of high-security delivery. The authority uses them when the destination facility is sensitive enough that its location should not appear in any vessel's navigation record. You go to the platform, you make the handoff, you turn around and leave. I had been told nothing about the destination facility. Neither had Sorek officially. The platform was crewed by authority personnel in the higher function black stripe uniforms, senior containment specialists, the kind who work the facilities where the Tier 9 designation lives. There were 12 of them, plus a medical team, plus what appeared to be a psychological assessment unit. All for one human. The transfer protocol began at 1100 station time. Sorek handled it, along with the containment officers. I stood back and watched and recorded because that is my function. They opened the suite. They brought Malin out. He came without resistance, still in the gray transit clothing, still with that quality of unhurried stillness. He looked at the authority personnel. He assessed them the same way he'd assessed everything else. Not obviously, not aggressively. Just the continuous quiet process of information gathering. He looked at Sorek. Thank you, he said, for the authorization during the Descari situation. Sorek looked at him for a moment. You didn't give me much of a choice. I gave you exactly one clear choice and a time limit, he said. You made the right call quickly. A pause. That's not easy under those conditions. Sorek looked at him for a long moment. Where are they taking you? He glanced at the authority personnel. I don't know the location, but I know the classification of facility. And it'll be fine, he said. I've been in cages before. Something moved across Sorek's face. Something she controlled quickly, but I saw it. She said, Is there anything? And then stopped. He looked at her, yes. Is there anything you want? She said. Before the transfer, anything I can. No, he said, gently. Thank you, Commander. He started toward the transfer platform, and then he stopped, and he turned around and he looked at me. Directly, no particular expression. Just that looking with those eyes that were always working even when everything else was still. Analyst, he said. Yes, I said. Keep asking real questions, he said. Whatever they tell you this was, whatever classification they put on it, whatever the official report says, you know what you saw. I didn't say anything. You're good at your job, he said. The right people should know that. Then he turned and walked onto the transfer platform, and the authority personnel closed around him, and the platform moved away from the sovereign reach. I watched it go. That's where I am now, sitting at this desk, with my personal notes and my memory and my hands that are still not entirely steady. 3 weeks later, trying to write down what happened in a way that captures what it actually was. I've been debriefed twice. Standard procedure after a high-profile containment transport. The debriefers were professional and thorough, and they asked the right questions, most of them. The ones they didn't ask were the ones I would have asked in their position, which is either a failure of imagination on their part or a deliberate choice. I think it was deliberate. There are things the authority does not want on the official record, things that complicate the narrative. The narrative, as I understand it from the debrief process, is this. A high-risk sapient subject was transported safely, an external threat was neutralized, and the subject has been delivered to an appropriate facility. Clean, manageable, filed. What the official record does not include is what I saw in those 14 days. What I'm trying to put down here imperfectly, because I think it matters. I think it matters that the most dangerous living thing in the known galaxy, the thing they've put a Tier 9 classification on, the thing that gets talked about in those particular hushed tones that authority structures use when they've encountered something they can't fully process, is a person. Not a predator, not a weapon, not a force of nature wearing a biological shape. A person who asked for reading materials, who said the cage was adequate but unnecessary, who negotiated with 3 warships using nothing but honesty and a clear understanding of the math, who went back into his suite voluntarily because the job was done, and that's what you do when the job is done, who nodded at me through a sensor feed in the middle of the night, because he knew I was watching and he wanted me to know that he saw me. That acknowledgement, that small, quiet nod. I keep coming back to that. Because here is the thing about danger, the real thing. The thing that gets lost in classification systems and threat tier designations and all the bureaucratic architecture we build to make the universe legible. Danger is not about power. Power is power. It's neutral until it's aimed at something. Danger, real danger, is about will. About what the power is aimed at and why, and what the thing that holds it is going to do when the situation gets complicated. And Carrick Malin, the thing we classified as Tier 9, as the apex predator of a cosmos full of Kethra syndicates and void leviathans and singularities that move, had a will that I understood, once I stopped being afraid of him long enough to listen. He went in when no one else would. He solved the problem no one else could. He sat down and waited when it was done. He asked for the grown-ups to come and take over. He negotiated when he could and reserved the other option for when he couldn't. He told the Deskari the truth and trusted that the truth was sufficient, which it was, because his assessment of the truth was more accurate than anyone else's. He walked back into his cage and read books and nodded at the person watching him in the dark. That is not a monster. That is not an apex predator in the conventional sense. The way the Kethra are, or the void leviathan, is creatures of power that are dangerous because they are powerful and power is what they are. That is a person who chose, at some point, to become the most effective version of what he could be, and did it so completely that the galaxy ran out of categories. And then he landed in a cage, because the galaxy does that to things it doesn't understand. It cages them. It gives them a number. It tries to make them manageable. And from inside the cage, if you're paying attention, if you're sitting outside the door, asking real questions, watching the monitoring feed at 2:17 in the quiet of the ship's night, you can see him watching back. Patient, understanding, waiting. Not because he's waiting for a chance to escape. Because he's waiting for the next problem. Because there's always a next problem. And he's the only one who can solve it. The galaxy would figure that out eventually. They would have to. Some threats are too large for any warship. Some crises are too complex for any committee. Some doors are locked from the inside of a darkness that no sensor array can map, and behind those doors are things that only a very particular kind of mind can navigate. The kind that sees 40 Kethra as 40 individual decision points. The kind that pings a ship's systems with controlled breathing. The kind that tells a strike captain the contract is burned, not as a threat, but as an honest statement of fact. The kind that learned everything, and then waited. I filed my report, I kept my personal notes, I kept the memory of that nod. And I think we made a mistake, giving the most useful thing in the universe a cage and a number and a Tier 9 classification and a sealed door. I think we confused dangerous with adversarial. I think we confused beyond our understanding with beyond our control. And I think that the thing sitting in that facility right now, reading whatever they've given him to read, monitoring the atmospheric systems, mapping the shape of his new cage with the quiet patience of someone who is very, very good at waiting. I think he already knows we made that mistake. And I think he's already figured out how it gets corrected. The question isn't whether he'll be useful again. The question is what it's going to cost us, in time, in pride, in the currency of understanding, before we're ready to open the door ourselves and ask. Because here is the last thing I know. The thing that sits at the center of everything I witnessed on those 14 days aboard the Sovereign Reach. The thing the files didn't say and the debriefers didn't ask, and the classification system cannot contain. He is not the most dangerous creature in the universe because of what he can do. He is the most dangerous creature in the universe because of what he chooses to do. And right now, in a facility we built to hold things that cannot be held, behind a door that he could map in his sleep, under a classification number that means we are very afraid and not entirely sure why. He is choosing to wait. He is choosing to be patient. He is choosing to trust that eventually the grown-ups will figure it out. The most dangerous creature in the universe is sitting quietly in a room,